Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's the Milan menswear shows. I'm back, which is nice. I've been chairing for a while. Yay, my glorious return. I've got an amazing set of panellists here with me to help talk a little bit about the Prada show, but also we're going to delve sort of more deeply into what's been going on during this season, and also kind of the start of the year in fashion, also last year in fashion. I think it's a really interesting time at the moment, and there's been a lot of quite inflammatory headlines, a system in crisis, how people are going to sort of, I guess, shape their shows into what a fashion show today needs to be in the context of what's happening in business. So it's quite an interesting time going to Fashion Week at the moment. I've just come back from Apathy and I was doing the London shows, and you're seeing sort of brands showing men's and women's together. You're actually seeing different seasons shown at the same Fashion Week. It feels quite confused, but also within that confusion there's quite a lot of sort of tentative excitement. But I'm interested to sort of delve into what everyone makes of how fashion brands should be operating. But before we sort of jump into our discussions, I'll let my fabulous set of panellists, who very kindly joined me on a Sunday, introduce themselves, starting with you, Trino.
I've worked in the industry for about 24 years. I started at McQueen in the beginning of McQueen about 24 years ago, and I was there until 2012. Then I was at Thom Browne as the president for 3.5 years, and the last year I've been back in London as the CEO for America's Transit.
Very impressive CV.
I am just Del Chodha, fashion writer. Pain.
My name is Karinna Nobbs, and I'm a freelance digital strategist and academic.
And I'm Nick Knight, and I'm the director of SHOWstudio.
Guest appearance.
Surprise guest appearance.
So exciting. I love it when you're on a panel. Trino, I'm going to go to you first because you know, as you said, you're very impressive sort of CV in terms of working on the business side with designers, and also seeing such a huge change, you know, from McQueen, and we've spoken about your time at McQueen and the kind of, in some ways, how small fashion was compared to what it seems like now, and the opportunities for experimentation were huge. And now being, you know, having had the menswear focus at Thom Browne, and now being an amazing sort of emerging brand in some ways, a new establishment brand like America's Transit. What are the challenges that are facing fashion brands of all different levels at the moment? What are the big things that sort of you're having to think about as a CEO?
Well, certainly fashion has changed a lot in my time. I mean, if you go back to sort of the beginning when McQueen first started, that was a time there was maybe 3 designers, 4 designers coming out at one particular time. Now you're looking at a fashion calendar in 4 different cities, and sometimes you can't even imagine how many shows there are in one particular time.
Exactly.
We, as people, we view all fashion brands on the same level, and they're not. I mean, when you talk about, I think now we talk about everybody finding their own way. We're talking about very different kinds of brands at very different parts of the maturity, but we like to view them all the same. So when we talk about Burberry's buy now, see now, Burberry is not a wholesaler, it's a retailer.
Yeah.
It's also, it's mass compared to a more high-level fashion brand.
Sure.
So the industry has changed, and we do view now all brands from the consumer point of view, we view them all the same, but they're not.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that is really interesting, and it is time that people took their own path, because we're all different businesses. But just because we're selling clothes or we're selling a dream, I think we get lumped together.
Sure.
You know, you can't compare Prada to a brand like America's Transit or even to a Thom Browne. But we have to put on the same level of shows, the same level of vision, the same quality of clothing, you know, so...
Is that sort of a problem with the Fashion Week setup? Because it does kind of, like, just by the schedule, lump people together, and you go and critics review each show, you know, they write a Prada review, and then that afternoon they write a review for a brand that might, you know, have been around 5 or 6 years. And is that part of the problem with Fashion Week?
I think certainly in some cities, I mean, New York doesn't feel, you know, most of the brands in New York are not really fashion brands, they're just clothing companies.
Sure.
But they're given the same position and the same viewing as everybody else. So, yeah, I think it's hard. I think that it's time for a refresh now. I think everybody feels it, and that's I think the point that everybody's at, and that's why brands are finding their own way. And now people are making decisions themselves because they've got that much more power, because they're able to find the information they want through the internet instead of just what they're being told. You know, it's like the Wild West up there right now.
Yeah.
I think what you were saying about kind of all the brands almost pretending to be at the same level in a lot of ways. When you look at young designers showing in London, for example, they treat it exactly as Prada would, and that's kind of quite damaging for some brands because they don't have the finances that a brand like this does, but also it creates a lack of difference between everything that we are seeing as journalists, as CEOs, as whoever. So I think what is exciting about this is that potentially there's now a new avenue for designers to actually be more honest and more personal about what the business of having a fashion brand. I think for too long the business of having a fashion brand has been it's been
like
very
a cookie cutter model.
Very cookie cutter, and very corporate, and also quite boring. I think there are sites that we all know that I think in some ways have really killed that excitement that I used to have for my own industry, because I don't want to know about some of these strategies that are happening. I just want to see the work. I just want to see the clothes. I want to see the campaigns. I don't want to necessarily read an interview with the CEO or the marketeer about that campaign. Not sometimes, yes, but generally I feel like a lot of that has taken over some of the just the glamour and some of just the fashion.
Or mistakes. I feel that's what we're afraid right now. It's to do the mistakes.
Do you think the mistakes cost more now?
Well, they're more visible now. They're more visible now because obviously they're recorded and they stay there forever.
They don't go anywhere.
But then some of the benefits that can come with making, taking a chance. I was just thinking, obviously working at SHOWstudio, we work in such a visual way, and sometimes when I look at campaigns or fashion shows, we're obviously talking about McQueen with you here, Trino, you look at some of those amazing shows and you just think now a kind of fantastical fashion show, it's all strategy. It's all like, what are the Instagrammable moments? What's the take? There's no sort of. Do you feel like this, Nick, when you're looking at campaigns now, having worked, on amazing things like the Yohji Yamamoto catalogues, that there is less of a sort of risk in terms of visualizing an aesthetic?
Probably. I think it's to do with the swap over from magazine to internet. I think the magazines probably don't have it anymore, and the internet does. And I think the whole magazine culture and the way it supported fashion so well for so many years doesn't exist anymore. Before they put 2 weeks into doing a campaign, an editorial story. So Richard Avedon would go off for 2 weeks to Japan with Diana Vreeland to do an amazing story of 12 pages. Now they're given that same story to do in a day. That's just not an investment into fashion imagery. Therefore, the level of fashion imagery, and this is not a reflection on the photographer, it's a reflection on the system, has come way down. There aren't the incredible photographs being created now that were being created before, because the opportunity isn't there. And therefore that reflects in advertising. The public get used to seeing a lower level of visual communication, and therefore anything that's a little bit more advanced just so stands out now. It looks actually wrong. So I think the visual level has sadly come down due to the magazines not supporting it. It's always been like my beef with magazines, that they don't support the thing that they're there to provide.
My beef.
Anyway.
It's interesting you say this though, because there's a really great interview that we did on SHOWstudio, maybe like 2 years ago with David Sims, and he used a phrase which has really stuck with me, where he said, I think a sense of propriety has been lost in this rush for content. And I think that's what's really interesting, as well as this term content, which is a really new term that has come in, and you must know a huge amount of this in terms of the kind of digital strategy, which is kind of what Nick is talking about, in the sense of you can't invest in one glorious image anymore, because you've got to think about, we need backstage images, and then we need, this many images that we can drop on our Instagram between this show and the next show, and we need, exclusive imagery to give to e-retailers. We need all of this. Do you think that's part of the problem, is the kind of glut of imagery that comes with digital has put a pressure on a kind of churning mentality?
And I think that there's also a kind of skills shortage as well, because people are having to experiment, because nobody really has a secret formula as in how to do that particular approach. I also think there's another issue, and you kind of touched on it earlier, in that people are looking at what their competitors are doing, not actually being true to their brand values, and also thinking about, what does my customer want, or what does my potential customer want, if I need to kind of change. And I think we're going to touch on those points today as well, because I think Prada are woken up to that fact.
Yeah, so tell me more about that, because it's an interesting time for Prada. There's been a lot of focus on, in some way, how Prada's struggling in some ways and not performing particularly well, but then Prada are experimenting with quite a lot of new things, which we're obviously going to talk about. And I think the interesting thing is the dipping of their toe into e-commerce, and we're talking about Mr. Porter, and they're making their clothes available, which is something that they've always really shied away from. And I feel like every brand who's done that is now having to do this kind of quite rapid, awkward U-turn of trying to then realise that actually there's no way that you can
ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. What do we all make of sort of Prada's difficult time, if we can put it that way.
I think definitely the kind of profit warning that they launched last April was a massive warning sign that they had to kind of move with the times effectively. And a lot of the interviews that I've read with senior executives kind of thought it wasn't right for their customer to sell online or to have kind of digital solutions, which is a kind of in contrast, because if you look at what they did with their epicenter stores, like the New York one, it was hugely technologically innovative. And I think they've got that resource there in terms of creativity. I think it just needs steered in the right way.
It's really clever that you say it, because I think that's the thing with Prada, is they've always been a kind of aesthetic leader and an aesthetic innovator, but when it comes to the business strategy, it just doesn't feel like it's sort of particularly, some things are really forward thinking, like the Prada Foundation, the amazing link with art, and that seems so beautiful and amazing. But then I think if you're looking for a brand that are doing really interesting sort of digital innovation, and I guess innovation in terms of sort of commercial strategy, I think you'd look at something like Gucci, which has retained that sort of interesting focus on aesthetic and imagery, but then also just amazing focus on digital, which seems really interesting and actually does have a sense, I think, of being really considered and thought through. But just with Prada, it just doesn't quite feel that way.
I think that's also kind of built on the notion that Gucci, for example, they listened and they watched, particularly in the social, and kind of touched into it that way, whereas I don't think the Prada execs were doing that in the same way, and that's why they're like, oh, I got a shock, we're not making money, we need to change.
What were you going to say? Something?
I just said it's look, when we talk about digital, there are some brands who are always going to be much better because it's really natural for them.
Yeah.
It's like Burberry was one of the first ones who really led, because Christopher was so interested in it, and it was natural. And like at Thom Browne, it was never really focused for us at Thom Browne, because it was not something that Tom was
believed in.
Well, no, they didn't believe in it, but it just wasn't his thing. He had strong beliefs in the way the store looked. Like he had a very, very strong belief in the aesthetics of the shop and of the clothes. So we can't be good at everything. We all can't be good at everything. And of course, a company like Prada, a company like Gucci can bring in somebody who has that expertise and passion, because it needs more than expertise. It really needs a passion. Because expertise is kind of like, oh, I know how to do it well. But a passion is kind of like, I can see where this is going, because you live and breathe it. And so, the big companies, they can bring in the expertise, but they've got to bring in the passion for that particular medium as well.
I also think in terms of innovation, yes, digital strategies and marketing, but also the collections. I mean, the last few menswear collections, when you see them in the store, haven't really kind of offered anything really. They've been very, very consistent and very, very commercial, which isn't a bad thing, but they've not been particularly exciting. At a retail level, when you go to look at Prada menswear, it's not something that feels
There's an
like
interesting
it might
thing
have
between
done.
the show and then what you see at retail, because I've really loved some of the last few collections, but then even just the way of working, Prada works in a very seasonal way. One show is really distinct and you can look at it and go, right, that was Spring Summer 14, that was whatever. Which I think also feels slightly out of step with how if you look at something like Gucci, like I actually am not remotely embarrassed to admit, as someone who's like a fashion journalist, if you showed me a Gucci piece or one single look removed from the catwalk setting, I'd find it really hard to say what show it was from. And that seems like a really modern way of working, this kind of seasonless way where everything kind of blends from one thing to the other. Whereas Prada really don't operate like that, which again feels slightly sort of out of step with, if you think about how brands are having to drop stuff into store, which is quite interesting. I was thinking about sort of some of the things we talked about, because I did an interview about a month or so ago with Dries van Noten, and he said some really amazing things, which he talked about it being a sort of really difficult time. He said, I feel like in times like this, people really want to go towards something that feels authentic.
Yes.
And I thought that was really, really telling. And I also asked him if he thought if he was starting now, if he'd be successful. And he said, I'm not sure. And he said, but I really like the idea now that you can do lots of different things. He was like, why can't you go live in a very small town and do a tiny little made-to-measure collection with your brother or sister or your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever you fancy, and sell it directly. And he was like, that's just as much fashion as showing in a big fashion week. And I wonder if that's what we're going to see out of this, where the big brands will have to sort of invest in digital.
I think designers believe that, and that is wonderful, but I don't know whether the kind of media system is designed to respect that wonderful ode to kind of genuine creativity that Trees Van Noten stands for. But I don't know whether it doesn't work. You know, we've all seen the schedule when we have to report on shows or go to them, and it is the kind of smaller ones that are in weird venues. And you know, just looking at what was really fascinating and encouraging about London shows is the return of Martine Rose and the show that she held kind of far away in Seven Sisters.
On the day of the tube strike.
On the day of the tube strike, but people went. Because they really, there's a huge love for her and it's really exciting. And so on that level, we can't all be good at everything, so that's not going to happen for every single designer that decides to make a return. And so I think there's that kind of tension between the stuff that we really would love to happen and just the business and the realities.
What do you then make of Gosh's decision to show in an exclave outside of Russia or almost outside of anywhere that was accessible?
Well, I think what's interesting about that Gosha thing is, in some ways, it seems like this kind of anarchist young designer thing to do, but actually, you know, and kind of there was a lot of kind of quite overexcited press being like, oh, you know, breaking away from this fashion system and making it, when actually it was so embedded in the fashion system because Comme des Garçons, who sort of financed Gosha, they do have enough money to fly a few journalists over there, so it wasn't exactly this kind of anarchist thing.
No, I do genuinely believe there used to be that real honest kind of love for a designer and a designer kind of, or a journalist or anyone making their own way and spending their own money. It's like, you know, yes, you know, all of us can find discounted ways of getting designer clothes, but actually the stuff that we've all paid full price for and not had any kind of exchange with anyone that could get us a discount, they're the pieces in my wardrobe that I
like the most.
Because I spent my own hard-earned cash on.
That's the problem.
And I think that's similar with our views, almost. We're spending our views very, very easily in places, and I think quite often with the Gosha show, yes, those journalists were all taken to this place in Russia. So of course, you know, there is a certain kind of politeness. You can't go all that way and be, you know, taken that this hospitality that you've received from a brand and then kind of sit there and say it's rubbish. Of course there's a lot of hot air, a lot of kind of hokum around what's happening, and I think that show was fine, but I think the thing that people are thinking about when they're commenting on it is the experience. And of course, if you're taken to this interesting place that you'd never go to, you're going to get excited about it. You're not really thinking about the kind of 100 sportswear looks that you've seen before.
We've all trekked around Milan, we've all trekked around Paris, we've all trekked around London, New York. You know, so
that was quite a trek. That was.
But it goes back, I think, also to this rush for content, which we're talking about how the brands have to do that, but now magazines or online platforms in themselves have become brands. You know, they have festivals and they have merchandise and what have you. So they're also feeling that pressure to create more and more and more, which is why fashion reportage, as you kind of hinted there, becomes very sort of hot air there, because it ties into this thing for clickbait, which is they need clicks as much as the brand needs clicks. So actually a kind of measured, insightful, intelligent review is probably doesn't feel particularly in keeping with the times, whereas a headline on your Facebook page that's like, you know, the new brands you need to know now who are revolutionising fashion is going to get you a lot more clicks. So you start to see this kind of weird way of reporting that everything is branded as like urgent and relevant and revolutionary.
But I think the way Nick was talking about fashion photography in that time, that space that you had to create, same with, you know, whatever medium you're using, be it words or pictures, we don't have the space to craft intelligent copy all the time. Of course, it's easier for some than it is for others, but you know, if we all had longer, all of our reviews would be better and all of our writing would be better, but we just don't have that time because your editor wants it online in an hour and a half. So.
But it's also the angle they want it with that I think is really interesting, and I particularly noticed this with the style magazines who've crafted these amazing sort of digital platforms, which in a way the style magazines were the ones that for so long really supported the younger designers, but I really worry now that there is this, everything is branded as like revolutionary, the thing you need to know, and that's really damaging for the small brands, because it means that, you know, they have this monumental press success that is not remotely matched by any form of sort of commercial success or investment from buyers. And also these words become really throwaway, so in 2 seasons time, you know, there's the gender-bending revolutionary designer that you need to know, and the one that did it 3 seasons before, it's like,
who's that?
No one remembers, because that's kind of worrying to me.
I think like that convergence of kind of content that you're talking about as well, it matches up with that trans-seasonalization. But what's interesting from a consumer perspective is there seems to be like a spectrum of there's a bunch of consumers that they know what they want, a bit like what you said, they'll go out of their way for like a journey, highly involved in the purchase kind of process. And then there's other ones who just want to be told what to wear, or this is the red dress you should buy this season, or this is the kind of black jacket or whatever. And it's interesting to see how brands and publishers kind of create content for each of those types of consumers too.
Because we need both. Because as a brand, you really want the innovator to be buying your products and be wearing it in a new way and showing that you're forward. But you also want that group of people that you can just sort of say, you're safe in my hands. You buy this from me, and you know you can walk into work wearing this. You can walk to an event wearing this, and people will recognise that you've got taste, you've got style, or you know you've bought the right thing.
But where does that message come out now? Where do you think people are looking for that message? I mean, I had a very long conversation with my son actually about the Gosha thing, where we were arguing different opinions on whether it was important for Gosha to show there or not. And he was saying, Gosha has such a huge loyal group of fans. They don't read Vogue. You know, they don't look at the reviews. You know, they're just buying it because they see it on Instagram. Their friends wearing it, and that's where they get there. So they don't need reviews. So I'm saying to him, well, why is Gosha then in that case, having anything to do with the fashion press at all?
Yeah, there is that interesting. We have a girl who interns with us. She works in Harrods, and she was telling me that everyone who walks in with information where they are then showing you on their phones and say, I want this as Instagram. It's not like a magazine article. They hold up a picture of the look, the catwalk look on Instagram, and like, oh, I'd like this, do you have it, or when is it coming in? And I thought that was really interesting as well, which is also putting a pressure on the fashion show, because the consumer wants a picture of a look on a runway.
By now. It's
exactly.
Well, they probably haven't sort of bought the fabric yet, so there's a long time before that's going to be available.
But that's the thing that's happened a lot on editorial shoots now, is that you're not allowed to mix the looks. Before, the point of the stylist, but they take a top from there and a bit of vintage and something they made themselves and mix it all together and create a new vision, not just repeat what thing that went down the catwalk. And that's stopped happening.
But
magazines don't allow it.
Become like extended advertising. And you see that with all the kind of like, you know, Gucci special or the Louis Vuitton special
because
in
now,
most magazine.
I mean, what you're doing is you're hindering the creativity and the mixing of the garments with other garments to get a new look, because you're saying, no, as a stylist, you know, I'm Prada, you can only put my jacket with my shirt, wear them with my shoes, it's a look. But then you've got the whole social media, massive social media, where they're not told what to do and they can photograph themselves wearing whatever they want. And so they've lost control. They've lost this huge amount of control, and for a brand like Prada that is very much, I think, about control and has really controlled its image in the most perfect way, I think. You know, it's been like historically, it's a brand that has always been very consistent, and everything it puts out is probably very considered, whether it's been the most exciting collection or the most exciting innovative business strategy, maybe not along the way, but it's been thought through and consistent to a point of probably its own detriment right now, because you've got this huge, big, like the world population able to manipulate an image and do whatever they want and share it with millions of people, and you can't stop it.
I think that's also part of the reason why there was this street style sort of phenomenon of looking at those images, which goes back to what you were saying, Nick, about stylists' ability to sort of mix things, because brands were trying to control that so heavily, but actually they can't really control how people put a look together. And I think that's also why people started looking at those images so much, which now themselves have become really, really controlled, because you're seeing brands approach a certain influencer and say, can you wear this head to toe to this show? But for a while, sort of the early days of street style, I think that's why it felt slightly more exciting, because that kind of emerged at the same time as the brands really, really putting an emphasis on stylists to shoot full look. But then you saw some girl looking great in the street having mixed it all up, and it is interesting. I do think that level of control is it's just not possible anymore. You know, the way your brand is going to be communicated about. Like, I think that was kind of part of the reason why that Saint Laurent thing became so hilarious. Those levels of trying to say you cannot say this or you must call this. It's just you can't have that. The brands that I think work best are the ones that are kind of let people in to sort of make their own decisions and communicate, which again goes back to the Gucci thing, where there's a lot of sense of quite sort of warmth and sincerity about the Gucci. It's very like, get involved, wear this. You know, you can always be a Gucci girl whether you actually buy and can afford that stuff. You know, it's that look and that aesthetic, and that chilliness of high fashion doesn't quite work anymore.
I think what you're saying though is Gucci is there going, come into the world and enjoy it with me. So in fact, they're still wanting you to represent it in the Gucci way. They still want you to do that. Maybe it's just it's a brand that can do that because it's upbeat, it's happy, it has, everybody's ready for that. There's a feeling to go down that route right now. There was certainly that's part of the success of Gucci, is that it came out at a time when people wanted to feel their emotion.
That warmth.
Yeah.
Prada is quite grown up as a brand, isn't it? It's quite mature in a way. Its customer, the way it presents itself.
Well, there's a chilliness to it, isn't there? It's not warm and kind of it's quite lofty, which I think some of us really love, but probably doesn't translate that. I think what Gucci get is that someone engaged, they understand that it's just as important to have someone buying a Gucci bag as it is to have a 14-year-old regramming your image, and they get that those are both just as important, because that kid that's regramming your image is engaging with the brand and is a consumer in their own way and will probably grow up to buy the other pieces, but they understand all of that. Whereas I think a lot of fashion brands, it's just about point of purchase and people buying stuff, but they don't understand that actually, brands always have to become like publishers now, and having people engage with that helps boost your brand. And I think that's what a lot of people aren't quite getting.
I think if everybody tries to be either everybody else, whether it's a publisher trying to be a brand or or vice versa, that contributes to the identity crisis, because no one's being true to what they actually believe in.
Yeah. And what you do, doing it well. Just do what you do and do it well.
Yeah. But you see that all the campaigns look the same at the moment and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? It's really strange. You look at everything and I was talking to someone out in Pity, and they were like, all the young photographers have exactly the same style of shooting. They're like, I can't tell who's who, and it's really true. And I know there's always trends in photography, but at the moment it is really, really.
But I think that's what I was saying right at the beginning, because they're not being nurtured. That the fashion magazines aren't doing their job.
Yeah.
They're not nurturing young fashion talent, fashion image makers. Before, they would be absolutely sort of supported by the magazine and educated by the magazine how to make a great fashion image. That clearly isn't happening because the magazine's totally underinvesting in it. So there's a total collapse.
So where is that investment and sort of fostering going to come from, do you think?
Well, I don't know, but I think because the whole system is changing so radically now, that just having a shop is being called into question. Do you actually need a retail space?
Yeah.
You can sell online. Do you need an advertising campaign if your show is when everybody sees the pictures? Sorry, when everybody sees the garments. So everything is changing so fundamentally. I don't think it's obvious where it's going to come from. But I mean, we champion fashion film for the last sort of 16, 17 years now, and I think that still has good currency. I think that's a good way of showing clothes, because you're showing clothes in movement. But whether that's a 15-second Instagram video or whether it's a sort of longer piece, that's being
or even a live stream of a catwalk show, which in itself is kind of a version of fashion film which has become really popular.
Yeah, I think this is the time when brands really articulate what they're about, the actual fashion show. I think the campaigns are largely superfluous.
Yeah, I do kind of agree with you there. It's almost like you feel like they need sort of 20 mini campaigns to come across.
Well, this is kind of what Prada have done, I guess, with their 365 Prada kind of launching, I think, 5 different stories, 5 different styles at the same time with a film to go with them. And weirdly, Jude Law. I'm not sure why he pops up in it.
Yeah. Well, actually, campaign. I was just flicking through a magazine yesterday, and even looking at Chanel, I saw I turned over the page, one double spread of Chanel advertising, black and white with the spaceship kind of headpiece. Next page, it's all pastel pink, and it's some 1960s. It's are they in the same season, in the same brand? That is completely different, and they're both ready to wear. We're not talking about a license and we're talking about one brand. I'm turning pages and I could be looking at 6 different brands. I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm kind of, who am I to say that you should be absolutely just giving one image or not? I particularly liked one image. I looked at the other one and thought, oh God, that looks awful. So at least they've got me on half of it.
Yeah. There's probably someone else who loves the other half.
Well, you're right, you do hit more bases,
I don't know what's right or wrong. It goes against what we say, which is you've got to be a purist and you've got to represent your brand in one particular way. Now I'm watching the show.
Oh, here we go. Well, that is an exciting first look, isn't it?
Yep.
I think we need to come back to education as well, if we can mention that afterwards.
Yeah,
not to sell.
Good point. I know we were talking about sort of is the fashion show still relevant, but just from a very sort of personal.
Is this relevant? Is this what you're asking me?
Yeah, but also I was thinking there is a vested interest in me, but I love going to a Prada show. I haven't usually I always go to the Prada men's show. This is the first time I haven't done it for about 4 or 5 years. and like the way they change the space every season, the whole experience of it. Like, you get the most amazing canapes when you come in, and they're like totally disgusting. Like, they taste really bitter. It's a bit like when you see a Prada show, and the set change, and it is kind of a really amazing experience.
But that's for the elite. How many people are going to that show?
Yeah. But that's why I do think it's clever that they've got the foundation, like the museum that people can go, the Wes Anderson design cafe, because it is like inviting people into that world.
It lets you really feel what it feels like to be inside.
What are we thinking of the collection so far? Nick, are you excited?
I'm thrilled. I'm on the edge of my seat. I've only seen 3 looks, so it's a bit early.
It's men's and women's as well, isn't it?
Well, she actually was a pioneer at putting the women's in with the men's, but it was in the more traditional sense of using it as an opportunity to show the pre. It wasn't kind of fully mixing men's and women's. Like, she's still doing 2 shows. There will be a women's show, but actually, you know, I think the first Prada show I ever went to, which must have been about 5 years ago, I think it was a men's show, but it was equal men's and women's looks.
Can I say, when we first started McQueen, if you go back to the early McQueen
there's
shows,
always,
it was men's and women's every single show.
Yeah.
And why was that, Trino?
Because we could only do 1 show.
Yeah,
exactly. And we do a women's wear show, and there was no men's fashion week. I'm going back 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, when it was Joan, and when it was, oh my God, all of those shows, even the one in the church, the Spitalfields Church, where we had men and women, that was the only chance to show men's, because there was no men's fashion week.
Right.
So
this is quite interesting for me seeing this day, because as we were talking about her putting the women's in with the men's, usually one thing that's quite interesting is it's never a kind of statement in favour of sort of any form of androgyny. Like, the women's looks are always really distinct from the men's. Usually, like, even if they sort of touch on similar fabrications, the girls always tend to actually look quite feminine, quite girly. Often they'll be wearing a lot of dresses, whereas the men are wearing a lot of more sort of tailoring and traditional. Like, not always, but that tends to be her tendency. Whereas with this, it's actually quite hard. Some of the pieces, it looks like the girls are just wearing the men's clothes, whereas often, you know, they'll be wearing a dress and the men will be wearing trousers and a shirt.
A lot of leather.
A lot
of leather, both men's and women's.
But I think it is also, it's a highly sellable collection, isn't it? You know,
so far,
yeah. But I kind of like that she's obviously kind of embracing that, like, to put out that first look, which is sort of boring in some ways, which she's done before when she did the show where it was opened by the kid in just like the red jumper and he looked like Harry Styles, and it was so sort of boring as a first look. It was like a kid in trousers and a red jumper, and that feels a little bit along this line.
I also just wonder how exciting Prada is to young fashion fans. I don't know whether it is even a brand that they necessarily think of.
I think younger fashion fans are probably his price point, because now you've got all these amazing brands who are producing, you know, interesting imagery, to go back to what we're talking about, and seem very cool and show at Fashion Week, but they're selling at a contemporary price point. So if you're a kid, you probably are interested in Marcus Almeida or Acne or Gosha, going back to what Nick was saying about Gosha, because feasibly, you know, they're still hugely expensive, but like, it is feasible that a kid could save up for a few months and buy a Gosha t-shirt, or, you know.
I just don't think that they're buying Prada, though, these young kids.
Well, no, they're just so out of their price point.
I don't think it's even price. I think they are buying Gucci because they think it's fun. I think you've got more chance than buying Fendi, which is certainly a mature, older brand, but they've got product which is...
Well, they've got like the fluffy bag charms.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, Prada needs to maybe lighten itself up a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, that's...
Back to the robot key rings.
Yeah.
But do you think what the problem is the range of product, though? Because with Gucci, like, it's just like so much stuff. You know, there's like rings and earrings and like little fluffy bits and bobs. Whereas Prada, like, it feels like it, and I think that's what Eddie Simon did so successfully at Saint Laurent. And it's also, there was just so much stuff. You know, there was like costume jewelry and like little bits and bobs that you could buy. Whereas with Prada, it feels like there's less. Like, I actually thought those sailor hats that they did were kind of genius, because it was kind of something quite small that, you know, you could buy into and get a Prada look without having to go the whole hog and buy sort of a dress.
I mean, it's expensive, but it's not badly priced, Prada. I mean, of course it's expensive, and it's not contemporary price, but it's not for everybody, because... But if you look at it, it's a fair price for designer level.
Yeah.
You know, it's, they understand the pricing strategy for sure.
But then I just think when there's things like Marcus Almeida or whatever that are selling at contemporary price point, you know, Acne level price point, where it's just so significantly cheaper, I think that makes it difficult to attract a younger audience.
Who is the Prada audience? Who buys Prada?
Well, it's it's that kind of huge fashion cliche whenever you hear it written about where people are always like, intelligent women buy Prada, like writers, curators, and I'm always like, who are these like women? Like, I always think of Alice Rawson because she used to wear Prada for ages for so long, but I guess, yeah, it's professional wear.
But this is a men's show, I mean primarily men's show.
Men's, yes, and working older men, I guess.
How many navy blue jumpers have Prada sold?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time when I think...
That's kind of what Prada is. It's a good navy crew neck.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting, if you go to Prada in Vista Village, and I always think going to this place, I think I've said it before, you get a very true representation of the fan base of a brand, and it is basically loads of men in the sports section buying the kind of nylon zip-up hoodies and sports jackets. That's kind of it, and the trainers.
And it's a safe
everything
thing.
else, you know, they're not interested in the shirts, they're not necessarily interested in the knitwear, but on the other level, I think Prada's customer is very much a very, very well-groomed, well-dressed, 40-plus man who likes wearing kind of smart
designer clothes.
Things.
Can afford designer clothes and doesn't want to make a mistake.
Yeah, he's not too suited up. I don't think he's very kind of put together. It's a kind of that wonderful Italian way of
commercially though, suits are one of their biggest sellers, particularly in the Chinese market.
I think what's interesting, what's striking me about this is the last women's show was you know, it's very heavily nostalgic, like a lot of the kind of old 90s Prada prints, but it was quite almost silly and fun, you know, all of that fluff and the fur and the pyjama looks, whereas this is much more austere. Whereas I was expecting something a bit more along the lines of the women's show, which it was quite sort of young and almost it could have been a Miu Miu show, you know, the pajamas, all that fluff, the girls in the kind of almost tiny little retro bikinis and what have you, whereas this is very serious.
Women are naturally just more
vivacious
fashion
dresses,
you know, and men, I mean, their customer, we know there's a great male fashion customer and he's out there and he's buying Gucci and he's buying Vetements and he's buying Thom Browne and they're buying all those new labels right now, but really women have for a long time been able to certainly play a lot more
with what they're,
but it's interesting that if the customer is over 40, why they're showing on teenage kids?
They have put some older models in this actually. Like,
so far?
Yeah, right at the start, which Prada has always done quite successfully with their casting, where they put like actors or older, but then they haven't done that for a few seasons. I agree with you, the casting is majority sort of like teenagers.
But I mean, I'm 58, but as a sort of, you know, middle-aged man, you don't want to look at a sort of 15, 16-year-old.
Yeah.
So you need to look at a man of your own age or older to try and aspire to be that person.
Yeah.
So for me, it feels like it's missed. You know, if I'm part of the demographic, it's slightly missed me because I actually don't want to pretend to look like an 18-year-old
kid. Yeah.
But I think they're on a rapid drive because they have to remain relevant for a younger audience.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that they were so slow to be on Instagram, they've managed quite well in the last year. They're now up to, I think, over 10 million followers, which is quite incredible considered they only joined about a year ago. They've been slow to Twitter and stuff as well, so now they're getting in that space where the younger customers are.
What do you think of their digital strategy? Do you think they're just slightly off the mark?
No, I think it's good, but there is a disjoint in terms of what you said there about it's not hitting that younger relevance of the demographic quite yet. It's in line with what Prada is, and so I don't necessarily think they should change that. I just think doing more with social will start to, and then also maybe more entry-level price points, like you said.
I guess there's also the difficult thing with the men's, which is on the women's there is Miu Miu, which, you know, gives them an opportunity to be sort of quite silly and fun and young. And then obviously there was Miu Miu Men's for a while, and there's all these rumours always that Miu Miu Men's is coming back, but then there isn't a Miu Miu for the men's, so then it's like, do you try and get the men at the same generation as the girls who buy Miu Miu to try and then buy Prada men? You know, it all gets a little bit confusing with that in terms of...
More confusion.
Yeah.
They had Prada Sport for that one period as well,
exactly.
I mean, you know.
Yeah, that's what I always thought Prada, where they sold most of their stuff was to sort of Prada Sport.
Yeah.
I'm not hugely enamoured with this as a show, but then Prada is always like a thinker. Like, you always go away and then you really, really like it afterwards.
I think people try and like it. I've rarely read anything negative said about.
People are too scared to say anything negative because they think they haven't got it.
And I think it's fashion people,
which is clever marketing.
But it's exactly like Comme des Garçons. Like people, like, if you don't like it, you come away and you're like, I'm an idiot. I must have missed something. This is really clever.
Intellectual marketing.
But I think with this as well, you know, you do quite often when you're reviewing shows, you are just hoping for a lofty statement from the designer, because otherwise what else are you going to say?
Yeah.
And I think that's what Mrs. Prada is very good at, is offering some sort of explanation to otherwise quite commercial, great clothes.
Yeah.
But there's
I've
no
heard that
great...
her show notes are the best, supposedly.
What's that?
Her show notes are the best.
But you never get like a comprehensive press release at all. You get like notes about the set and often the music, which they started doing. One season she did a note about the whole men's and women's thing, which was about a year before all the kind of men's and women's showing together, and everyone got the, oh my god, there's Prada show notes. But even then, you don't get that much explanation about.
Or maybe that's what I knew. There was something about the show notes.
Yeah, it's really interesting that like the kind of.
So you've got to make your own mind up.
Yeah, but it's the same. A lot of brands kind of do that. Same JW Anderson does it. I think JW Anderson is kind of carving out that Prada pathway in terms of when you're at a JW show, you have that same thing of like there must be some kind of lofty intellectual meaning behind this that I'm just not getting, and he doesn't give you a show note, but you go backstage and you maybe get like this really sort of quite bombastic quote about the collection, and it's kind of a little bit like that Prada model of creating this intellectual veneer around what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out whether I think Prada is pretentious or not, because there are other brands. I adore the pretension of JW Anderson. I think I love it. That's proper fashion for me. Whereas with this, I think it's straddling that, let's be really kind of mysterious and intellectual, but also let's sell shitloads of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't feel honest to either person that wants one of those things. So I wish it was just really honest with its commerciality and its vision, or just really kind of like, you guys are poor, don't touch this.
But maybe that's like a thing with Mrs. Prada herself.
You kind of want it to be, do you know what I mean? Just a bit more bullish and more arrogant, or less so. It's kind of straddling, because I think it's obviously kind of Gucci's ruffled feathers and kind of gone, God, those guys are so friendly and approachable and warm. What are we? You know, we're sharing this concrete bunker with this creepy kind of organ music playing. We don't want to necessarily let all these kids come into our shops, but at the same time, they need them to.
Yeah. But then I think that is probably Mrs. Prada herself is probably slightly, because I think, she's obviously incredibly intelligent, and very political. And I mean, I'd love, you read interviews with her and she says something, but I really would love to know what she actually thinks about the state of fashion, and what like the kind of people who she actually wants to buy her clothes, and whether she gives like two hoots about the sort of people that they put on the front row and what have you. Because I'm sure she finds it all a little bit ridiculous, and probably does in an ideal world, would love to operate like a small designer that could be a bit lofty and removed.
What about the husband? I don't think he thinks like that.
No, I think he always doesn't. But that's what's really interesting, isn't it? It's like the pressure of being a designer in a big business, and like what your priorities are compared to what the priorities of the business are.
So how much does the husband play in all this?
Well, he's
kind of like a business part.
Yeah.
He's a business partner.
He's the business strategist.
Yeah, he runs. I mean,
he's like
I think
charge.
He's in charge. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know, having never worked in Prada, I don't know the mix between the two of them and who gets to say what, but I think
He's a very strong hand.
I think he has a very strong hand, and certainly in the philosophy of the business. And if you think that it's a little bit hard and aggressive, and there is that element, she has that kind of warmth and the idea about being slightly crazy, kind of old art teacher, kind of eccentric about her. Yeah. He doesn't.
Yeah. Right.
He has not got one. He's not the geography teacher.
Right.
In this world, he is in that stiff
is he
Italian
headmaster
suit.
Or the sports teacher? Where are we going?
He's on the board of governors of the school.
Yes, he's on the board of governors of the
got
school
it.
with his private jet.
Yeah.
So he's a big part of this. He's a big part of this. Then.
Yes.
I think he's the one that's to be
like
criticised for the over-control.
It's like when they bought Helmut Lang and they bought Jill Sander.
Yeah.
And I think he was the one who probably, I'm sure that she respected those brands because they both had strong visions and were great designers. And he's obviously bought into it, but I think he controlled a lot of what perhaps went wrong with those two businesses and why they didn't work in the Prada fold.
Right.
What's interesting looking at this, she looks fun with her little fluffy skirt in the women's show. What's interesting when we were looking at that show is I did think actually when they were doing the walkthrough, towards the end is it does get slightly more sort of playful. There was more colours and a lot of surface detail, which I imagine is kind of like giving something to the kind of stylists and people that's going to become more of a kind of instant look. And it's interesting, like the fact that people were sat on like the beds and the set looks a bit like an apartment with the tiled bathrooms and stuff. There is always that kind of naughty undertone to Prada, but it goes back to what you were saying about like, what do you then believe? Like, do you believe the kind of camel coloured coat that we saw that's obviously a commercial piece, or do you believe this kind of eccentric intellectual world? Yeah, it does feel a bit like that, but then I always think J.W. Anderson feels really like that. It always feels a little bit like, I mean, that's very British. It's this kind of like manners and undertone of like, it's a bit like weird and fetishy, but really proper on the surface. And I kind of find that really interesting. You know, he shows in like a military school when he does his, and it is really that kind of stiff upper lip, but then it's really kind of fucked up underneath. And there's a little bit of that with Prada. But like, I just think the statement of having your guests sat on beds and then that's the opening look, like that is quite, it's really interesting.
Buy a new blue jumper.
But do you know these weird mixed messages? It's like kind of...
I'm trying to situate the whole thing. I'm sort of getting The Graduate from it. Sort of
yeah, exactly. But do you know what I mean?
It's a sort of, you know, quite nerdy, but slightly kind of wanting to be hippie. Yeah. So the thing they're wearing around the neck, which I couldn't really see, but was a feather or a crystal or something.
Like a charm.
Yeah.
There seems to be a bit of that going on.
But I know exactly, like that's exactly it, it's those mixed messages of it all, which goes back to what you were saying, which is that divide between trying to do something that is exciting, kind of appeals, but I just think that, so Natalie Westing there, like she looks like she's literally wearing a men's outfit, like it doesn't look, whereas that feels very new for me to see in a Prada show. Like usually the girls, and towards the end of the show they do get like this, they're wearing like dresses and
But this is pre-collection as well. So I think she probably feels that, I mean, the reason we stopped putting men in the women's show at McQueen is because we ended up, Lee had to manipulate the men's show to make it flow with the women's show. So he'd manipulate the collections, and he couldn't do the collections as he wanted them to do because then they wouldn't sit together so well on the catwalk. And this is what, you know, that was from a designer who wanted to design menswear over here and women's wear here. And now you put them together and, you know, she's having to do something to make it flow.
But there's a lot of grumbling about that at the moment with the shows being merged from menswear designers or menswear press, which is that, you know, if you're merging them, like women's wear is always going to win. You know, you're always going to, like, and a lot of people like menswear deserves better than this because it is the case that, you know, the men's collection is going to be tweaked and modified to be able to slot better into the women's collection. Predominant, like, you know, attention is going to be paid to the women's wear press. There'll be less seats available to the men's wear press, and it is going to be, you know, the big, like, it's going to be the Kendall Jenners and the Gigi Hadid, and the women's wear is going to take that focus, and men's wear is going to sort of, which is a shame because it's been a real exciting time for innovation in menswear where it's been able to really grow because it's had its own spotlight. So in a way, I think it seems more sort of socially progressive for them to be combined because it's in keeping with sort of, as society, this the sense of sort of equality when it comes to gender, but I think in terms of design it's probably quite worrying for the menswear when it's going to have to be, as you say, manipulated to slot into a women's show.
But I feel like the women's was more manipulated here.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, Prada does do more embellishment, I think, on the collections normally within women's wear, and it is. This didn't feel as much as a women's collection as in the past. Yeah. You know.
I like the kind of 70s colour. She does a really good brown Prada.
Beautiful colours, actually. That's one thing I'm taking away as a real, from the beginning of the show, the colour range was beautiful.
Yeah, it is really, and she does really awkward colours really well, which she's really, you know, like
an art teacher.
Yeah, she is like the fabulous art teacher fashion. But I like the kind of fluffy shoe, you know, that kind of, that is this kind of touching on, you know, when you say fluffy shoes, you think of the Gucci ones. So I get, there's elements of trying to be a bit fun and silly. Like it does get more mad as it goes through, you know, like from that opening look, which could be anyone walking into a business meeting, you know, it's like definition of smart casual. You're getting the hats added and then the slightly more eccentric footwear and then the little bits of jewellery. But it's not the most. Are you overpowered by it, Dal?
Not in particular, but it's left me kind of questioning whether we need fashion weeks anymore.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'm sure that's what she hopes for.
Just because it's great and they're wonderful and it's a great collection and all of those things, but I don't even think we can wouldn't even want to patronise Mrs. Prada by trying to pull this apart almost, because it is, it's her vision, so fair enough. But I just think, the knowing how much effort has gone into producing this show, I don't know whether this needs to happen anymore. I just feel like when you see those young designers, so in Italy, for example, in Milan and in Florence, there were some new designers that were coming up. And that was really exciting to kind of see their work and within the context of a show. Whereas when you see this stuff, I don't know whether I want to see this in a show. I just think go and do an amazing campaign and use Instagram and digital kind of in the way that maybe we are, and engage more with your customer. Don't necessarily speak to just a very small proportion of people.
And as I said, there's so many collections and so many shows that we're going to see over the next sort of couple of months. Is this one going to stand in our memory? Like in a year and a half's time, is any of us going to go
reference it?
So what's the proportion in the show audience of buyers and press?
Half and half. The thing is, buyers never really like that. It's this really weird thing that Fashion Week is meant to be a trade show, but actually, if you speak to most buyers, they don't really go to that many shows. They
haven't got time. They're doing
and they've been pushed in the role.
They're in the show as well.
It very often goes 50% press, 25% buyers, 25% guests.
Right.
So that would be a fairly not unusual. Prada is mainly their own retail. They don't have a lot of buyers. They don't have a big wholesale business, so perhaps they don't need so many of those either. And they'll probably have a lot more celebrities in there than other brands would.
Right.
So,
but I've done fashion weeks. I've done fashion weeks with buyers and got to the end of the fashion week and they've literally gone to like 2 shows. So the only time I've seen them is either at Reese's or at if we've met up for a coffee or a drink, because it is really interesting to do fashion week with buyers, and I always try and spend time with them because you get this other side of it. But like the shows, it's just like another world to them, because what they see in the showroom and what they know about the brand is so different to all of this.
All these 70s jackets.
Exactly.
You're not going to walk into all these stores and you're going to find typical Prada bestsellers, sporty little jacket that they do really well, the navy blue jumpers that they do really well, you're going to buy the Prada classics, and it's a classics brand, really. So
I was talking to somebody who has a shop in California. He was saying he doesn't go to shows at all, just does it all online. Watches online and just clicks and orders, and that's it. So there's no point in spending the time. You might as well it's done much more quickly and much less fast.
Is it men's or women's?
Men's.
I think you can do it with men's. I don't think you can do it with women's.
Right, really?
Yeah, because I think having a store, if you're an online store, I think you should be able to do that, because you should look at an image and say, this looks great online, so I can sell it online because I can see how good it is. I think this is where, when you're talking about business right now, you either sell online and you're strong online, and you're strong online because your price is perfect, your product looks good online, it does what it says in the picture when you get it to your house. Or you walk into a store and you have a store environment which makes you feel excited.
But
the presentation.
The store environment normally makes you feel not excited. Prada, they tend.
Prada, yes.
But it's a weird thing. Prada have these amazing stores. But actually, when you go in, you're made to feel like scum.
Yes.
All the shop assistants either ignore you or look down their nose at you. I'm sure it's not just me.
I once had an argument with a Prada shop assistant in Italy where I was like, I want to speak to someone else. I was like, you're being very mean to me. She was like so horrible. But then when I went into Prada in Florence, I bought some shoes, and the man was like the nicest person in the world, and I loved him so much. But it was because you could tell actually, and Gucci are really good at this with their staff. I sound like a Gucci PR, but I do think they're just very clever at the moment. Where he knew the collections inside out, and he really quickly realised that I knew collections. So it was like telling me all about the show and being really engaging. But I think he seemed like the kind of person that also, if I'd have clearly known nothing about the collections and didn't even understand seasons, wouldn't have pushed that on you. And that's the problem you often get with, I think, how it translates to the shop is it's stuff that also understand all the different levels of awareness, because people are more aware now, and you see that, like people know what seasons are, or they go in and they're looking for the new thing, and you need staff that can understand all those different touch points, that maybe someone does know Fashion Week inside out and has looked at all on Instagram, or maybe there's someone who's just seen it on a celebrity, and you need that touch point.
Don't you have to read somebody? Because I hate being served by somebody. I mean, I'm somebody who just wants to go in quietly on my own. I don't buy online. I want to go quietly on my own, pick something up and get out of the store as quick as I can. It's not...
Stealth shopper.
I don't want to engage with somebody, I don't want to share my views.
People are talking about, did you read about the Amazon Go store, where you don't have to, there's no, it's sales assistant free. and they recognise you. You pick the stuff up, you put it in your bag, and then you walk out.
Do you have to pay?
I just find that
You pay remotely.
No,
you do pay.
Where's place? But it is weird that like, the fact that people want like less and less communication. I find that really, really weird. You know, like, because that is the kind of what e-commerce is. It's like a really lonely experience. Like, you choose something and then you buy it, and there's none of that kind of like. Obviously, if you're in a shop and you're like, does this look good on me? The assistant's obviously gonna be like, yes, you look fantastic. But like, I do think that's weird that consuming has become this kind of like, it's all about speed and convenience now, and I think that comes from just how everything's purchased online now. Like, you order a
one-click
order
mentality.
Your food, it's just like, you know, you order your clothes. But I think that's also a problem for a lot of these brands, like someone like Prada, where there is a sort of an intellectual bent to the collection, or a focus on interesting fabrications or textiles or whatever. It's like, how do you get that across to a consumer who has no interest in really having a conversation before they buy? Like, if people were just buying online.
That's why they probably didn't want to go online, because you lose the opportunity. Well, I mean, I think you lose the opportunity to see some of those textures and to see the work that goes into a garment, because online it might not show, because you're seeing it in a lineup. It's not like it's an editorial. You're not seeing it in a kind of creative way. When you look online to buy a product, they want to show it in the cleanest possible, generic.
But there's an opportunity for that, I think, for what you've just, because like you say, a lot of the luxury websites, they all look the same now. And in order to be different, there's going to have to be more creative ways through film and other ways, integrating with social, having kind of multi kind of different perspectives.
Well, I think now Instagram's shoppable. That's going to happen through, because I think you know, Instagram is just a more exciting platform to browse, you know, than browsing net or whatever, because the pictures all look the same. Whereas Instagram, I think, would be really interesting in a couple of years' time to see how sales have happened through that. Because if you can buy something through looking at a picture of someone wearing it in the street, or a beautiful, you know, a celebrity wearing it, or whatever, or even like a beautiful still life shot, I do think that is more engaging, and I think that's going to change.
But it's also because there's only one image on the screen.
Yeah,
it's back to why we probably liked like print images in a magazine as well, because it helps kind of
focus. Yeah. So what's the solution? What do we think is, you know, we're saying that everything's kind of up in the air at the moment about fashion. How should it all fall down? What are our sort of, you were mentioning education, do you think that's part of the issue?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of, I know it's a discussion that kind of goes on all the time, but that balance of making sure that, or I don't have the answer to how it works, but the teaching of design and the teaching of business strategy and marketing, that there has to be a better blend of that.
See, I don't
disagree.
Well, no, I find it quite hard, because I think that we now expect a creative to be able to do everything. Can one person really do everything well?
No, yeah.
And you really want them to, sometimes you really want them to create and to give us something really exciting. And I don't think we have to talk to, I mean, I do want to talk to the customer and find out what they want, but actually the success is really creating something the customer didn't realise what they want. Because if you're asking the same customer, what do you want? You've got 860 brands making the same products for the customer. Like, the gem is when you've got one brand suddenly going, I don't know what all this noise is about, but I'm just going to do this. And it sounds like a really crazy, silly idea, and that's when the customer has to come to them, and that's when you're creating something different.
But that's what Vetmore were kind of actually really clever with, was like seeing that gap for something like that, but also not really kind of doing enough market research, because they'd obviously worked in-house at different places, but not really just having this singular vision, and also not pushing themselves on other people. I think that's part of the problem with what we're saying, is like, a lot of the brands like devalue themselves because they're like, look at us, look at all this stuff we're doing, look at us, and that doesn't feel like aspirational. Whereas when things are pulled back a bit, you are like, oh, okay, I actually want that.
Don't you want to discover it yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like when you say, but I don't want to be told by, not going to be told by a sales associate about something. I don't want to be pushed into something. I don't like being pushed into it. I like to discover it myself. I like to walk into a store and look at something and go, oh, look at the applique on that. That's kind of much nicer than I realised online. Or this is like, you know, this is actually really rich fabric.
So I actually quite like being told about things. I like to go into a shoe shop and be told what, you know, that it takes 10 whatever hours to make the lace holes.
Can you go on Prada's Instagram just so we can have a look at it, please?
Thank you.
Prada's Instagram.
It's very celeb focused, their
Is it?
Instagram. Yeah, weirdly, it's always red carpet. They're like,
there's no user generated content either.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's really
controlled.
It's a very monologue.
It's very
thinking
controlled.
fashion since 1913. Wow.
Ooh.
See?
I know, weird, huh? It's weird. But yeah, really like...
Normal.
So you said at the beginning, aren't they launching digital platforms now? This is about, they're launching something.
They're launching like a 360.
They launched 365 in the beginning of January.
It's
And
this
how
row
is
here at the
365?
bottom of the screen.
So what they're doing is they're releasing different images on different platforms on a kind of regular basis because they want people to discover the brands their way. So they are trying to do, I think, what we're just discussing.
Right. So having been tacitly involved in undermining photography, fashion photography as an art form, they're now trying to champion it.
Yes. But what's weird is, like, Nick and I are really obsessed with this film that they did, Trembled Blossoms. You know, that amazing animation film that they did. I can't remember when it was. It was like, it's quite a long time ago, maybe 2004?
Yeah, I thought so, yeah, early 2000s.
And it's like they did this amazing, like really weird animation film, and it's incredible. I just never did anything like that again. And I'm like, now is the time to do stuff like that.
They also had an amazing Prada auction as well that was like kind of vintage archive pieces that they were selling, and it was counting down. And I honestly have Googled it still to show people, and you can't see anything about it.
Really?
Which I think is kind of wonderful, because it harks back to that old thing of, well, you didn't see, you missed it. But there's some of that energy seems to have...
Remember when, I think that was around the same time that Lanvin did that amazing dancing.
Oh my God, that was 2011, that was amazing.
Yeah, there's been like some really, I mean, things that we all remember right now and we all hark back to that made us feel really happy when we talk about them still, you know? There's like moments when you're like, why didn't they do, I know you can't do the same thing again, but why are they so rare?
Yeah, they are really, really rare. But I think it's just, as Nick says, there's just not the if you just don't have, in a way you think that, but I kind of, you know, I'm contradicting myself now, but in a way you think, you know, there should be more room to experiment, because if you're making like so much different imagery, like just do something that's a bit mad, and then if it doesn't do so well, you know, you've got another image
experimentation.
Like,
Gold costs money.
Yeah.
I think what this misses any soul. I mean, that's my artistic disagreement. They're lovely images, and I don't know who took them. But I feel overall, when you look at the website, it misses soul. I mean, the real sort of sense of something that's difficult and gut-churningly important and passionate and all those things that you want to see, you know, about the whole range of emotions we have in life. This all feels very
safe.
She swapped photographers for the first time this year.
She was
Willie,
Van
This is Willie van der Peer?
These ones.
Yeah.
Are these this Willie? I didn't think this. It might. I don't want to say definitely is. I didn't think it was, but I'm probably wrong on that. Yeah, maybe it is. But yeah, she did swap photographers.
But you want to feel that, you know, this passion of life in imagery.
Yeah.
You know, you want to feel something that makes you stay awake at night, and
But
that's what you need. I mean, it's just like music.
Risking. There's no risk.
Yeah, there's
I think that's the word that.
But with no risk, then you have no passion, and you have no kind of desire.
Movement, and you have no movement forward.
I think it was Alex Fury who wrote a piece recently, and it's something that actually we've kind of said on panels as well, which is that the headline he used was saying that it's not sex that sells in fashion anymore, it's like apathy. And we have talked about that on panels, that like the driving thing in fashion at the moment that seems to be what everyone is looking for is this kind of nonchalance and this loftiness and this like I don't care sort of spirit. And
do you think so? Because I think right now we all really care.
I think we do, but if you look at the imagery, it's like a girl slouching, I don't give a shit, like no makeup, like, you know, it's not like, there's no sort of drama or thirst or like anything like that. Like, it's so anti-drama at the moment. You know, anything that looks dramatic or sort of overworked.
I think it's quite anti-everything. I think a lot of fashion and art and everything has become anti-everything.
Do you think the problem is that business is so prominent in it now? Before it wasn't so prominent.
Oh, I do think so, definitely.
Do you think everything, as we say, you know, what sells now? Actually, it shouldn't be about what sells. It should be about the passion from the designer or the image maker or whatever, not about what sells. I've had this argument countless times with lots of different people, but I don't think because something sells makes it good.
But it doesn't. If you talk to like, you know, it's like even if you look at Dior, like the most profitable designer at Dior was Bill, what's his face? Bill Gaten. It wasn't like Galliano, it wasn't anyone, and it's like, who's like, oh, Bill for Dior? Like, no one, you know. So the designers that have moved fashion forward, like Lacroix or Helmut Lang or whoever, like, they're never people who were particularly like hugely commercially successful. You know, some have managed to track, like, that's interesting with Rei Kawakubo as an example of that, but then it's like she's almost separated her businesses out, where like the show is so removed from like all those pouches and stuff.
Yeah.
But isn't that what, like now looking at it, I think that's what we all do. It's like you you need to talk to your customer and you need to talk to press. They don't necessarily want to hear the same things. Like they don't. And we're sitting here because you've got to talk to the customer and explain what work went into that garment and, you know, why this is great for your life and why it's worth spending £850 on this particular great item.
But do you think brands are patronising their customers now? Because there's probably behind the scenes videos that will tell me why it costs 900 quid, because I've seen someone selling it. So there's this weird kind of sense of we are telling you what to wear because you don't know anything, but everyone knows the same now. I don't think you necessarily need anyone to guide you.
What's really interesting is looking at like those resale sites. Like I did a piece about it like a year and a half ago. It was almost too early because they've grown so much now. But like if you look at something like Vestiaire, that's so fascinating because it's people like women who love fashion or men who love fashion selling their pieces on to other people that also love and are really in the know, and all the brand control is like totally removed from that, and it's really interesting to look at like what's selling well and what's not, and then it kind of makes, when you look at more formal e-com, it makes it almost look a little bit ridiculous because you're like, well actually people don't care about all this like hoopla around it, they just want the best deal, and you know if they know that they really want this piece, they don't mind buying it from someone else. And
do you know Japan have been doing that for years? They all the fashion kids in Japan have been buying clothes for decades. One of the first, especially the men, one of the first cultures to really get behind buying fashion before men's fashion became a global kind of industry. And in their very small houses, they'd be buying in the rooms that they would have, they'd buy fashion, then they'd have to sell it 3 weeks later, along with their technology, because they'd always want to get new things. And that's something that many years ago used to happen in Japan, that the kids would buy something and then they'd be selling it, like, you know, not buying for last, keeping the economy going. You know?
Well, that's the thing.
Buying,
like,
selling, buying.
You don't own things anymore. Like that, you kind of use them for a while and then pass them on. But I think Vestiaire is really interesting in terms of that. I'm conscious we could go on for a very long time, but should we? Like, does anyone have any final thoughts? Does anyone have any magic solutions to what's going to sort of, I guess, halt all of this sense of a system in crisis that is happening? Or do we even think the system is in crisis?
I don't think it's in crisis. I think it's just in total change. We're going from one system to a completely new system. So the old system isn't in crisis; it's dead, and the new system hasn't quite taken hold yet. So I don't think it's in crisis.
It's in flux.
It's in flux.
In flux.
Yeah. And I think I've done some research on like the consumer decision making process, and that's very much moved from being a quite linear and straightforward to being like online, offline, jumping here, there and everywhere. And again, I think for each brand, you just have to do research with your customers to look at, well, how do they kind of travel around? And many brands still don't have their online and offline systems talking to each other.
Yeah, they don't have sufficient data.
That's going to make a difference because good people are going to understand.
I think something would make a huge difference is artificial intelligence. And I think that's going to start to really get into the way that people work and sell and live. And that's not showing up at all yet on anybody's radar in fashion. But
fashion is actually really not quite conservative. It's not very innovative, which is the funny thing about
radically conservative.
Yeah, exactly, radically conservative.
So we were talking about the shops earlier on, and I'm thinking, why don't they have robots in the shops? That's what they're going to have eventually. But they do. That's what in Japan they have. You go in there and it's very, I can't remember the name of the robot. Pepper, that's it. Pepper the robot, who you press their chest and they talk to you and everything else. And they're polite and they're engaged and you can find as much information as you want or as little as you want.
Whereas we just have unexpected item in the background. It's like less.
Please come and get this off.
I mean, it's taking humans out. AI is obviously in some ways replacing humans in lots of different functions, but I think in fashion you still need an element, a human element, and I don't know whether that's probably missing right now, which is why we're all feeling slightly concerned about where this whole flux, because a lot of the human element, as you were saying about the campaigns, feeling quite kind of cold or you know, lacking in that sort of.
But that's actually going. What's interesting about Mary, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, is I think that's part of the reason of her success is that she's so prolific in where she goes and meeting customers and trunk shows, and I think that's really fascinating, because to have cottoned onto that as you know, when building your brand of actually like, I just need to get out there and meet the women who buy my clothes and that's almost the difficult position that brands like Prada's in. It's like they're too big to do that, but kind of
but actually it's very natural for Mary when you talk about doing something that's authentic. Like I could have never taken Lee like McQueen to stores to go and meet shop assistants. I mean, you just couldn't, you know, it wasn't natural. What was really natural to Lee was something very different and very authentic, and that's what he did. But Mary, she's really good at it because she loves it, and it's really natural. And actually, we go not only to meet the actual customers, but she goes to the stores in the morning, has coffee mornings with like the sales associates, and they share really funny stories, and everybody comes out of it with a real understanding of the brand. But we do it because it's natural, it's authentic, and she enjoys it and they enjoy it because it's...
But that goes right back to what we said at the start then, which is just that everyone needs to find their own way.
Yes.
And that's part of the problem at the moment, is everyone's like desperately searching for this sort of magic solution, and there just isn't one.
It's about being who you are, is what you've been saying all along. It's about being what you're good at, and then letting that be your business model.
Doing it with passion.
Yes.
Well, should we give Mrs. Prada a round of applause?
Yes,
Thank you so much to talk about.